Good evening. Tonight we turn to the shadows, where ordinary places become the stage for extraordinary events. In deserts and forests, by lakes and in quiet villages, strange lights have descended. Wreckage has been swept away, and voices not of this world have spoken. These are the stories that slip through silence, dismissed, denied, yet never erased. Each leaves behind fragments, scars, whispers, and shadows that linger long after the moment has passed. What follows are their accounts. Beneath the desolate mesas of northern New Mexico, the small town of Dulce seemed like the last place anyone would look for secrets. Remote, quiet, and ringed by high desert scrub and forested hills, the town barely registered on a map. Life there unfolded at a slow pace, ranchers tending cattle, families gathering at small cafes, the Jicarilla Apache Reservation defining much of the community. Yet for decades, whispers circulated that beneath its soil lay a hidden facility, an underground complex where things not entirely human carried out experiments beyond imagination. For those who believed Dulce was not just another desert town, it was a doorway to something darker. The story broke into wider awareness in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Rumors of cattle mutilations had plagued the region, with ranchers discovering livestock drained of blood, organs removed with surgical precision, and no tracks to explain what had happened. Local law enforcement dismissed it as predators or cult activity, but to others, it was evidence of something more systematic, something that pointed toward technology far beyond human capability. As mutilations escalated, whispers of underground labs began to take shape, their supposed entrance hidden in the Archuleta Mesa outside Dulce. By the mid-1980s, a handful of researchers began to connect strange dots. They spoke of black-budget programs, subterranean construction, and cooperation between elements of the U.S. government and non-human entities. The picture that emerged was chilling. Deep beneath Dulce, miles of tunnels and chambers housed laboratories where genetic experiments, hybridization, and biological research were carried out in secrecy. And at the center of those rumors was a claim that humanity was not alone in the facility. It was shared, ruled, some said, by reptilian beings and the smaller gray figures so often reported in abduction lore. But the most dramatic account to ever emerge from Dulce came years later, tied to a man named Phil Schneider. He was not a rancher nor a local. He was a geological engineer, contracted, he claimed, to assist with underground construction projects for the U.S. military. His specialty was high-level tunneling operations, the kind required to build bases deep beneath the earth. In the early 1990s, he began speaking publicly, insisting he had been part of a secret effort in the late 1970s to expand underground facilities in New Mexico. What he revealed would become one of the most controversial testimonies in modern UFO lore. According to Schneider, The project at Dulce was not a routine dig. It was, he said, an extension of an already existing underground network. He described drilling crews lowering themselves through shafts that descended thousands of feet. For days, the work continued without incident, until one morning when the crew broke through into a cavern that by all logic should not have been there. What Schneider claimed they found was not an empty void of rock, but a chamber already occupied. As he told it, the workers stumbled into a nest of beings unlike anything human. Standing 7 to 8 feet tall, humanoid in form, but covered in scales, they stared with slit-pupiled eyes that radiated a cold intelligence. Behind them, smaller gray entities seemed to cluster, watching in silence. The men froze. The creatures, Schneider claimed, did not. What followed in his telling was chaos. A confrontation broke out almost immediately. The reptilian figures reacted defensively, raising devices that emitted beams of searing energy. Schneider himself claimed he was struck in the chest and hand, the blast tearing open his body and burning away fingers. Panic erupted. Soldiers escorting the team opened fire. Within seconds, what was supposed to be a construction operation devolved into a firefight in the dark depths of the earth. Schneider said dozens of men died that day, soldiers and workers both, before the survivors retreated to the surface, leaving the chamber behind. He would later show the scars publicly, pointing to the mutilated hand where fingers were missing, to the deep mark across his chest. For him, they were proof of what he had endured, a permanent reminder of the day he confronted something not of this world. His story did not end there. In Schneider's account, the Dulce Base was not abandoned after the incident. It was secured, expanded, and incorporated into a sprawling subterranean network stretching across the United States. According to him, a treaty had already been struck between factions of the U.S. government and non-human beings.
Within those hidden laboratories, Schneider claimed grotesque work was carried out. He described vats where human and animal tissues were blended, hybrid forms suspended in glass tubes, and experiments that blurred the line between science and nightmare. Abductees, he suggested, were not simply studied aboard fleeting craft in the night sky. They were brought here, to places like Dulce, where examinations and genetic extractions were overseen by entities working alongside human handlers. The reptilian figures, he said, occupied the highest levels of control, issuing orders to Greys who acted as technicians, while human military personnel provided security. To those who listened, the implications were terrifying. Schneider painted a picture of an alliance built on coercion, with humans tolerating unspeakable violations in exchange for technology and power. He spoke of secrecy enforced by force, of colleagues who disappeared after speaking too much, of threats against his own life. His lectures were filled with urgency, as though each retelling brought him closer to an inevitable end. "I am risking my life by telling you this," he once said, his voice steady but grim. The town of Dulce itself remained outwardly unchanged. Ranchers still worked the land, families still gathered in the evenings. The mesas loomed as they always had. But among UFO circles, the name Dulce became synonymous with hidden horrors. Archuleta Mesa was said to conceal elevator shafts leading miles below. Locals whispered of strange lights flickering near the ridge, of humming sounds in the night, of cattle vanishing without explanation. Researchers who visited described black helicopters circling the area as if to warn them away. Dulce had become both legend and magnet, drawing those who sought proof and those who feared what might be true. For Schneider, the weight of what he carried only grew heavier. He continued to lecture, showing diagrams of underground bases, repeating his story of the firefight. But in 1996, his life ended abruptly. He was found dead in his apartment under circumstances that fueled further suspicion. Officially ruled a suicide, many of his supporters rejected the finding, convinced he had been silenced for revealing too much. His death only deepened the aura around Dulce, transforming his testimony from allegation into martyrdom within certain circles. To skeptics, the Dulce Base remained nothing more than a conspiracy theory, a tale woven from cattle mutilations, Cold War secrecy, and the imagination of believers. They argued that no evidence of such a massive underground complex had ever surfaced, that Schneider's claims were unverifiable. But for those who believed, the absence of proof was the very point. A base hidden beneath a remote mesa, controlled by entities with motives beyond human comprehension, would never leave neat evidence behind. Its existence, they argued, was buried in classified files and sealed chambers miles below ground. And so the story persists. Decades after the first whispers, Dulce remains a cornerstone of UFO lore, a place where the lines between reality and legend blur into shadow. Whether Phil Schneider was a whistleblower or a fabricator, whether Archuleta Mesa hides only stone or something far more disturbing, the name Dulce carries a weight that few other locations in UFO history can match. It is invoked in hushed tones, a reminder that beneath the quiet surface of small towns and empty deserts, there may be truths humanity is not prepared to face.
In the spring of 1967, the wilderness of Manitoba stretched wide and empty, a land of pine forests, granite ridges, and countless lakes that gleamed beneath a pale northern sun. For prospectors, it was a country of possibility, the kind of terrain where veins of quartz and silver might break the surface and fortune could be coaxed from the rock. Stefan Michalek, a Polish immigrant who had settled in Canada after the war, was among those who walked these lonely woods with hammer, compass, and map in hand. He was methodical, disciplined, a man who preferred the order of stone and soil to the chatter of crowded streets. When he set out that May, he was thinking only of minerals. He returned with something else entirely, a story that would etch his name into the annals of UFO lore. On the morning of May 20th, Michalek traveled by bus from his home in Winnipeg to the rugged terrain near Falcon Lake. Carrying his tools, a notebook, and the steady patience of a man who knew prospecting was as much endurance as luck, he hiked into the trees and began his search. The sun rose higher, painting the lake in dazzling reflection. The air was clean, sharp, tinged with the scent of pine and earth. Hours passed in silence. Then, sometime in the early afternoon, as he crouched over an outcrop studying the quartz veins within. A sound broke the stillness. It was a noise unlike the calls of birds or the rustle of wind in the branches. A rushing, mechanical whir rising and falling drew his gaze upward. There, against the blue expanse of sky, two shapes descended. They were not aircraft in any familiar sense. Metallic, ovoid, and gleaming, they seemed to hover with an unnatural steadiness, one settling onto a rocky clearing nearby, the other pausing in the air before darting away. McCulloch blinked, astonishment freezing him in place. The craft that remained was no more than 50 feet away, its surface reflecting the afternoon light in silvery brilliance. Caution warred with curiosity. McCulloch was not a man prone to fantasy, and his instinct was to approach it as he might approach a geological anomaly, with careful observation. He noted its size, roughly the span of a small house, its curved, seamless body, and a protruding dome at the top. The craft rested on the rocky surface without wheels or landing gear, as though balanced by some unseen force. As he drew nearer, he could hear it, a low hum punctuated by sharp bursts like the hiss of steam. The air around it smelled strongly of sulfur, acrid and metallic, stinging his nose and throat. At one point, a panel opened on its side, revealing an interior glow. From where he stood, he could make out shapes inside, indistinct and shadowed, as though figures were moving just beyond his sight. He raised his voice, calling out in several languages, Polish, German, English, hoping for a reply. None came. Only the continued hiss and hum of the craft answered him. Gathering courage, he stepped closer still, until he stood at its side, the heat radiating from its surface, forcing sweat from his skin. He reached out with a gloved hand and touched it. The metal seared through instantly, burning the fabric and singeing his flesh beneath. He jerked back, pain flaring. The craft was hot, almost unbearably so, its surface alive with energy. As he circled cautiously, he noticed what looked like a grid or exhaust vent near its edge. He bent to examine it, squinting against the glare. In that instant, the panel abruptly expelled a blast of heated gas. It struck him squarely in the chest, knocking him back and setting his shirt aflame. He fell, tearing the burning cloth away, his skin scorched in a strange, patterned formation, an array of circular burns arranged in a grid that matched the vent itself. The pain was immediate, overwhelming. Dazed, choking on sulfurous fumes, he staggered to his feet just in time to see the craft lift silently into the air. Within seconds, it was gone, a shrinking glimmer against the sky, leaving behind only the acrid scent and the ringing of his own heartbeat in his ears. Alone in the wilderness, McCulloch collapsed to his knees. The injuries seared across his chest throbbed with agony. He vomited violently, the nausea surging in waves. To the physicians, it was as if he had been exposed to radiation, though tests yielded no clear explanation. The story he told, that of a hovering craft, a blast of heated gas, and burns from contact with its side, was met with skepticism, but the wounds themselves could not be denied. News spread quickly. Reporters descended upon him, their cameras and notepads eager for every detail. He recounted his experience calmly, methodically, as though reciting a geological survey. He did not embellish, nor did he stray from his account, repeating the same details each time: 2 crafts, 1 landing, the sulfur smell, the burning metal, the blast that scarred him. To those who listened, his sincerity was undeniable, yet the tale was too extraordinary to be easily accepted. Was it hallucination, a hoax, some secret military experiment gone wrong. Investigators traveled to the site near Falcon Lake, following his directions into the forest. There, on the rocky clearing, they found evidence that gave pause. Vegetation near the spot was scorched. The soil bore traces of unusual radiation, and samples of clothing carried residues that puzzled analysis. The pattern of burns on his chest lingered for months, fading and returning in cycles, as though the skin itself carried a memory of the event. For Michalek, the nightmare did not end. His health continued to falter, the nausea recurring, his strength failing in fits and starts. He endured with quiet resolve, never wavering from the story he told. Skeptics attempted to dismantle his account, suggesting he had burned himself deliberately, or that the injuries were the result of a mundane accident with chemicals. Yet no one could explain why a man of his standing, a disciplined, practical prospector with no history of delusion, would fabricate such a tale. The physical traces, the consistency of his testimony, and the strangeness of the injuries set the case apart. It was not merely a story of lights in the sky or fleeting glimpses of unknown craft. It was an encounter that left scars, evidence written directly onto the human body. In the years that followed, Falcon Lake became a name spoken with a mix of fascination and unease. For believers, it was proof that contact with the unknown was not a matter of lights in the sky, but of direct, physical danger. For skeptics, it was an enigma that refused to yield to simple explanations. For Michalek himself, it was a burden carried in silence. He lived with the injuries, with the fading and reappearing grid of burns, with the memory of that acrid sulfur stench that no doctor could wash away. He never sought fame, never demanded recognition. He simply told what he had seen and endured, leaving others to decide what they would believe. The wilderness gave him no answers, only silence. And within that silence, the Falcon Lake Incident took its place as one of the most enduring mysteries in UFO history.
In the uneasy years following the Second World War, America's deserts and plains carried whispers of strange wreckage falling from the sky. The summer of 1947 had already brought Roswell into the public imagination, a brief flurry of headlines about a flying disc recovered in New Mexico before the story was hastily retracted. In the wake of that event, silence closed like a curtain. Yet not all of the stories remained buried. 2 years later, in the quiet stretches of central Texas, near the town of Killeen, rumors began to surface of another recovery, one no less strange than the desert tale that had preceded it. Killeen was an army town, defined by the sprawling presence of Camp Hood, later renamed Fort Hood, an installation that stretched across the countryside with firing ranges, training grounds, and the ever-present rumble of military convoys. It was a place where secrecy was routine, where classified projects passed without notice among the local population. In 1949, the base was buzzing with the movement of men and equipment when something unexpected occurred in the skies above. According to accounts that emerged years later, the incident began with a crash in the scrubland outside Killeen. A loud explosion echoed across the hills, drawing soldiers and ranchers alike to search the source. What they found was not the debris of a plane, nor the familiar wreckage of military hardware. Scattered across the ground lay twisted metal unlike any they had seen, fragments of a craft with surfaces that glimmered strangely in the Texas sun. The pieces were light, impossibly thin, yet resisted attempts to cut or bend them. Some were said to shimmer, as though alive, shifting hue under the touch. To those who stumbled across the site, it seemed as though the material belonged to no known aircraft. Military personnel moved quickly, sealing the area. Trucks rolled in under the cover of darkness, canvas tarps pulled tight over cargo beds. Witnesses who lingered were ordered away, their questions met with silence. Ranchers recalled seeing floodlights sweep across the land as soldiers combed the wreckage, gathering every scrap. Within days, little remained but scorched earth and rumors. The pieces, it was said, were taken back to Camp Hood, locked within secured hangars where they could be studied far from public eyes. The secrecy was thorough, yet whispers persisted. Among the soldiers, tales circulated of crates marked with unusual warnings, of officers who handled the material with gloved hands and guarded expressions. Some spoke of a recovery team that arrived from out of state, men in plain uniforms with no insignia, their authority unquestioned even by ranking officers at the base. They moved with quiet efficiency, directing the collection of debris, loading trucks bound for unknown destinations. To those who watched, it was clear that whatever had fallen was not to be discussed. As the weeks passed, the official explanation drifted toward the familiar refrain: a downed military aircraft, an experimental balloon, nothing more. Yet those who had glimpsed the wreckage struggled to reconcile those claims with what they had seen. The metal, impossibly light yet unyielding, did not resemble any aircraft material known at the time. Nor did the silence of commanding officers suggest routine procedure. To the men stationed there, it felt as though they had been brushed against something extraordinary, only to be told to forget it. Years later, fragments of testimony would surface, tying the Killeen recovery to a larger pattern of secrecy. Some researchers pointed to Project Moondust, a classified effort to recover foreign space debris, as the program that might have overseen the operation. Others speculated that Killeen was linked directly to Roswell, that it was part of a chain of incidents in which objects of unknown origin fell to Earth, each quickly swept under military control. The parallels were difficult to ignore: sudden crash, rapid recovery, silence imposed. For the town itself, life moved on in ordinary rhythms. Families shopped along the main streets. Children played in dusty yards. Soldiers rotated in and out of training cycles at Camp Hood. Yet beneath the surface of routine, there lingered a sense of unease. Older residents remembered the night convoys rolled through, their trucks heavy with hidden cargo. Some recalled soldiers posted along rural roads, waving away anyone who strayed too close to the recovery zone. In coffee shops and back rooms, speculation filled the gaps left by silence. Over time, the Killeen Incident took on the character of a buried memory. It was rarely mentioned in official histories, its details scattered across interviews and reports decades after the fact. Yet those who revisited the story found its echoes compelling. It was not only the debris that seemed unusual. Some accounts spoke of strange radiation detected at the crash site.
of instruments that spiked inexplicably when held near the recovered fragments. There were whispers, too, of injuries sustained by soldiers, burns or sickness that followed contact with the wreckage. Whether those details were embellishment or truth, they added weight to the growing sense that something more than a simple crash had occurred.
In the broader context of the late 1940s, the incident fit a troubling pattern. Roswell in 1947, Aztec in 1948, now Killeen in 1949. Each event involving a sudden fall from the skies, each met with swift military intervention, each erased from public view as quickly as it appeared. To those who believed, Killeen was another thread in a hidden tapestry, proof that encounters with the unknown were not isolated, but part of a sustained and secret history. For Stefan Michalek at Falcon Lake, the mark of contact had been seared into his flesh. For Phil Schneider, the Dulce Base remained a scar upon his life. But in Killeen, the story was quieter, more elusive. It was the story of silence itself, of witnesses left with questions, and a landscape scrubbed clean of evidence. It was the story of soldiers obeying orders without explanation, of crates vanishing into the depths of secured hangars, of memories fading beneath decades of denial. Yet even in its silence, the Killeen Incident persisted, whispered among those who remembered. As the years passed, Fort Hood grew larger, its ranges expanded, its role in America's military presence cemented. Tanks rolled across the fields, helicopters thundered overhead. The modern machinery of war became its constant soundtrack. Yet, for some, the memory of 1949 lingered like a shadow, a reminder that not all of the machines moving through those hangars belonged to any known army. To walk the fields around Killeen was to tread on ground that had, perhaps briefly, held something not of this earth. The Texas sun sets hard and fast, sinking behind low hills in a blaze of red and gold. As night falls, the land grows quiet again, the hum of insects replacing the drone of aircraft. Somewhere in that stillness, the memory of a crash endures, carried in fragments of testimony, and the uneasy certainty of those who saw too much to forget. Killeen's story is not as famous as Roswell, not etched into headlines or history books. Yet for those who know it, it holds the same unsettling truth, that sometimes in the vast skies above, things fall that are not meant to be found. And when they do, they are gathered swiftly, hidden away, and never spoken of again. The village of Scoriton lay nestled in the rolling hills of Devon, England, a place of narrow lanes, stone cottages, and fields that faded into the mist of Dartmoor. It was the kind of countryside where time moved slowly, where generations tilled the same land, and the rhythms of rural life carried on largely untouched by the modern world. In 1965, Scoriton was as quiet as any English village could be, its evenings filled with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Yet it was here, in this quiet pocket of Devon, that a story would unfold, one so strange it would defy simple explanation, a tale whispered later, as the Scoriton Mystery. It began with a man named Cyril May. A farmer and local resident, May was not prone to wild imaginings. He was practical, the kind of man whose days were spent working with soil and animals, his nights closing with the steady silence of the countryside. But in 1965, something occurred that would leave him shaken, a series of events he would recount with quiet insistence until his death. The evening was cool, the sky streaked with the fading light of sunset. May had been walking near his fields when he noticed something unusual in the sky, a bright object, larger than a star, descending slowly toward the ground. At first, he assumed it might be an aircraft, though the silence with which it moved gave him pause. As it drew closer, the object took on a form unlike any plane he had seen. Oval, luminous, and radiating a pale glow, it settled with a strange steadiness into a nearby field. The air was charged, filled with a faint humming that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. May approached cautiously, curiosity warring with unease. As he neared the craft, a panel slid open with a motion too smooth, too deliberate to be anything mechanical he knew. From the opening stepped figures, 3 of them, humanoid in shape, yet unmistakably different. They were taller than average men, slender, clad in close-fitting suits that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Their heads were slightly elongated, their faces pale, eyes large and luminous. Though their features bore a resemblance to human form, there was a strangeness to them that left no doubt in May's mind. These were not men from Earth. To his astonishment, one of the figures spoke, not with the sound of voice as he knew it, but directly into his thoughts. The words formed clear and precise in his mind, as though carried by an unseen current. They told him not to fear, that they had come to deliver a message. Standing frozen in the field, May listened as they described themselves as visitors from beyond, concerned with the state of humanity, with its wars and weapons and the dangerous path it tread. Their message carried an urgency, a warning that humanity must change or face consequences it could scarcely imagine. One figure in particular seemed to take the lead, tall, commanding. Its presence filled the space around it with an aura of calm authority. May later described it as more insectoid in bearing, its head moving with subtle jerks, its large eyes unblinking as it regarded him. Whether it was truly insectoid or simply alien in manner, he could not say. What struck him was the clarity of the communication, the sense that these beings operated on a plane of thought far beyond human capacity. The encounter stretched on, though May could never say precisely how long. Time seemed to bend around him, moments stretching and collapsing in ways that defied his sense of reality. The beings spoke of the future, of coming trials that would test humanity's survival. They warned of environmental collapse, of wars that could scar the earth beyond healing, and woven into their message was a strange suggestion that humanity itself was not alone in its origins, that its history was intertwined with forces from beyond the stars.
When the encounter ended, it did so abruptly. The beings withdrew, stepping back into their craft. The panel closed without sound, and the luminous oval lifted silently into the sky. Within seconds, it was gone, vanishing into the night as though it had never been. May stood alone in the field, the hum fading from his bones, the silence of Dartmoor pressing in once more. Yet he knew with certainty
that what he had seen was no dream, no hallucination. It was as real as the soil beneath his feet. The Scoriton Mystery lingers, not because it was ever proven, but because it refuses to be forgotten. Cyril May's testimony, part warning, part enigma, still drifts like the mist over Dartmoor, unsettling in its uncertainty and enduring in its resonance. In the end, it remains less a solved case than a haunting reminder that some encounters lie forever beyond explanation. The lights fade. The wreckage is carried away. The fields grow quiet once more. Yet the stories remain. They linger in scars etched onto skin, in warnings that echo long after the voices are gone, in memories that refuse to be silenced. History may dismiss them, officials may deny them, but still they endure in fragments, in whispers, in the shadows left behind. And so the question lingers, unanswered, waiting in the silence. End of transmission.